My wife said, "If you were better in bed, I wouldn't need him." I smiled and replied, "If you were better at hiding affairs, you'd still have a husband." The words hung in our kitchen like smoke from a grease fire. Vivian stood there in her silk pajamas, coffee mug frozen halfway to her lips, realizing she'd just confessed to something she'd been hiding for months. The morning light streaming through our bay window caught the guilt in her eyes perfectly. "I'm Elliott Mercer, 42 years old, senior structural engineer at Hartwell & Associates. I design bridges that last centuries and buildings that withstand hurricanes. I also used to design a life with the woman standing across from me, but that blueprint got scrapped somewhere between her first lie and this moment." "Elliott, I didn't mean—" "Sure you did." I poured myself another cup of coffee, keeping my voice level. 20 years of marriage, and she picks Tuesday morning to drop the truth bomb. "You meant every word. The question is, how long have you been meaning it?" Vivian set her mug down with shaking hands. She was 38, still beautiful in that sharp-featured way that made men look twice at restaurants. Apparently, one of them had been looking long enough to catch her attention. "We need to talk about this properly," she said, switching into that careful tone she used with difficult clients at the law firm where she worked as a paralegal. "When emotions aren't running so high—" "Emotions?" I laughed, and it came out dry as sandpaper. "Viv, I'm an engineer. I deal in facts, measurements, stress points. Right now, I'm calculating exactly how much stress this marriage can take before it collapses." She tried to step closer, but I held up my hand. Not angry, just tired. Bone-deep, soul-crushing tired. "Who is he?" "Elliott, please." "Who is he, Vivian?" Her shoulders sagged. "Craig Dutton." Of course it was Craig Dutton. Managing partner at Kellerman, Dutton & Associates, where Vivian worked. 43 years old, divorced twice, drove a BMW that cost more than most people's houses. The kind of man who wore Italian leather shoes to Casual Friday and probably practiced his smile in mirrors. "How long?" 6 months. The words came out as a whisper. 6 months. While I'd been working late on the Morrison Bridge project, she'd been working late with Craig. While I'd been bringing her flowers on Fridays, she'd been giving him reasons to stay after hours. While I'd been planning our 20th anniversary trip to Ireland, she'd been planning her exit strategy. "The business trips to Richmond," I said. It wasn't a question. She nodded. "The new lingerie you said was for me." Another nod. "The phone calls you take in the garage." "Elliott, stop!" But I was just getting started. "The credit card statements you've been hiding, the late nights, the way you flinch when I touch you." Each fact landed like a hammer blow. "Did you think I wouldn't notice?" "I'm paid to notice when structures are failing, Vivian. I've been watching ours crumble for months." She was crying now, but they weren't the tears of someone who felt guilty. They were the tears of someone who'd been caught. Big difference. "I never wanted to hurt you," she said. "But you did it anyway." I finished my coffee and rinsed the mug in the sink. That's the thing about consequences, Viv. They don't care about your intentions. I walked toward my home office, the one room in the house that was entirely mine. The door had a lock, and I was the only one with the key. Vivian had always complained about that, said it wasn't healthy for spouses to have secrets. The irony wasn't lost on me. "Where are you going?" she called after me. "To work. Some of us still have jobs that matter." I closed the office door and turned the lock. Through the wood, I could hear her sobbing in the kitchen. Part of me wanted to go back out there, to hold her, to try to fix this like I'd fixed everything else in our marriage. But that part was getting smaller by the minute. I sat at my desk and opened my laptop. The Morrison Bridge project files stared back at me, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about structural integrity, about load-bearing capacity, about what happens when the foundation of something shifts without warning. My phone buzzed. Text message from Vivian. We can work through this. I love you. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. Love wasn't the issue here. Trust was. And trust, once broken, was like a cracked beam in a building's frame. You could reinforce it, patch it up, paint over the damage, but it would never be as strong as it was before. I opened a new browser window and searched for divorce attorneys in our area. Not because I was ready to file, but because I was an engineer and engineers always had backup plans. The first name on the list was Harold Ashford, Esquire. I'd gone to high school with Harold. He'd played football while I'd boxed. Different sports, same understanding of how to take a hit and keep moving forward. I picked up my phone and dialed his number. Ashford Legal, this is Harold. Harold, it's Elliott Mercer. I need to talk to you about something. Not over the phone. A pause. Harold had always been sharp. Personal or professional? Personal. Very personal. My office 6 tonight. Come in through the back entrance. Thanks, Harold. Don't thank me yet. You might not like what I have to tell you. I hung up and stared at the Morrison Bridge blueprints on my screen. Funny how building something took years of planning, months of construction, and decades of maintenance. But tearing it down, that could happen in an afternoon. My phone rang. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times in the next hour. I didn't answer any of them. At lunch, I drove to the bank. Our bank, where we'd opened our first joint account as newlyweds, where we'd gotten the mortgage for this house, where apparently Vivian had been making withdrawals I didn't know about. Mr. Mercer, the branch manager smiled as I approached her desk. What can I do for you today? I need to review all account activity for the past year. Everything. Checking, savings, credit cards. Her smile faltered slightly. Is there a problem? I'm hoping not, but I need to be sure. 20 minutes later, I was staring at 6 months of hotel charges, restaurant bills, and purchases I didn't recognize. The Richmond Marriott, the Jefferson Hotel, expensive dinners at places Vivian and I had never been together, lingerie from a boutique downtown. The total came to just over $8,000. $8,000 of our money spent on her affair. I made copies of everything and put them in a folder marked documentation. Then I opened a new savings account in my name only and transferred half of our joint savings into it. Legal, clean, and smart. By the time I got home that evening, Vivian was waiting in the living room with a bottle of wine and what looked like a prepared speech. Elliott, please sit down. Let me explain. I looked at her sitting there in her best dress, the one she'd worn to our anniversary dinner last year. She'd done her hair and makeup like she was going to court. In a way, she was. Go ahead, I said, but I didn't sit down. Craig and it just happened. We were working late on the Patterson case, and he was going through his divorce, and I was feeling neglected. Stop. I held up my hand. Just stop right there. Elliott, you were feeling neglected. I work 60 hours a week to pay for this house, this life, everything you said you wanted. I brought you flowers every Friday for 20 years. I remembered every anniversary, every birthday, every stupid little milestone you cared about. I gave you space when you needed it, and attention when you asked for it. So don't you dare stand there and tell me you were neglected. She was quiet for a moment. Then, you're right. That was unfair. Unfair? I laughed, and it came out bitter. Unfair is when the grocery store runs out of your favorite ice cream. This is betrayal. I know, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Elliott. I ended it. Last week, I told Craig it was over. Because you got caught, or because you felt guilty? She didn't answer, which was an answer in itself. Here's what's going to happen, I said, pulling the bank statements from my jacket pocket. You're going to explain these charges, all of them, every hotel room, every dinner, every purchase, And then you're going to tell me exactly what you and Craig talked about regarding our marriage, our finances, and our future. Her face went pale as she looked at the papers. You went to the bank? I'm an engineer, Vivian. When I suspect structural damage, I investigate. What I found was worse than I thought. She spent the next hour trying to minimize, justify, and explain away 6 months of lies. I listened without interrupting, taking mental notes of every contradiction, every half-truth, every attempt to shift blame. When she finished, I folded the papers and put them back in my jacket. I'm sleeping in the guest room tonight, I said. Elliott, please. We can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can't fix anything until you decide whether you want to be married to me or to the idea of being married to someone like Craig. I headed for the stairs, then stopped and turned back. One more thing, Viv. That comment this morning about me being better in bed? Craig's got 2 ex-wives who might disagree with your assessment of his performance. Maybe ask them for references before you make your final decision. I left her sitting in the living room with her wine and her tears and her carefully prepared apologies that came 6 months too late. In the guest room, I lay on the narrow bed and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I would meet with Harold and start planning for whatever came next. Tonight, I just needed to process the fact that my marriage was over, even if the paperwork hadn't been filed yet. My phone buzzed with another text from Vivian. I choose you. I choose us. I turned the phone face down and closed my eyes. Some choices, once made, couldn't be unmade. Some words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. And some trust, once broken, couldn't be repaired. The fracture had begun. Harold Ashford's law office occupied the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house on Elm Street, the kind of place that looked more like a therapist's office than a legal battleground, which I supposed wasn't entirely wrong. People came here when their lives were falling apart. I used the back entrance as instructed and found Harold waiting in his conference room with 2 cups of coffee and a yellow legal pad covered in notes. You look terrible, he said by way of greeting. Thanks. You always were good with the compliments. Harold had aged well since high school, still built like the linebacker he'd been, but now the muscle came with gray hair and laugh lines. He'd been through his own divorce 5 years earlier, which made him either the perfect attorney for this situation or the worst possible choice. Tell me everything, he said. I did. The confession, the bank statements, the 6 months of lies. Harold took notes and asked questions, his expression growing grimmer with each detail. Craig Dutton, he said when I finished. I know Craig. Represented his 2nd wife in their divorce. He's a piece of work. What kind of piece of work? The kind who thinks his money makes him untouchable. The kind who's probably telling Vivian he'll leave his current girlfriend for her, just like he told his 2nd wife he'd leave his 1st wife for her. Current girlfriend? Harold raised an eyebrow. You didn't know? Craig's been seeing Amanda Pierce from the DA's office for about 3 months. Started right around the time his thing with Vivian began. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like the moment when you're looking at structural plans and realize the architect made a fundamental error that compromises the entire building. He's playing both of them. That would be my professional assessment, yes. Harold leaned back in his chair. The question is, what do you want to do about it? I want to protect myself, financially, legally, personally. Smart. First thing we do is document everything. I mean everything, Elliott. Every lie, every expense, every conversation. Virginia is a no-fault divorce state, but adultery can still affect alimony and property division. He slid a business card across the table. This is a private investigator I work with. Former police detective. Very thorough, very discreet. If you're serious about protecting yourself, you need professional documentation. What about the money she spent on the affair? That's marital waste. We can recover some of it, maybe all of it, depending on how good our documentation is. Harold made another note. You said you already moved money to a separate account? Half of our joint savings. About 15,000. Good. That's within your rights. Don't touch the checking account or any other joint assets without telling me first. We want to be aggressive, not stupid. I pocketed the investigator's card. What else? Change the beneficiaries on your life insurance, retirement accounts, anything that currently lists Vivian as the primary. Do it tomorrow. After that, we start building your case. How long does this usually take? Harold's expression softened slightly. Elliott, I've known you since we were 17. You're one of the most methodical, patient people I've ever met. This situation is going to test every bit of that patience. I'm not looking for patience, Harold. I'm looking for justice. Justice and revenge aren't the same thing. Maybe not. But they're not mutually exclusive either. I left Harold's office with a folder full of forms to fill out and a clear understanding of what the next few months would look like. It wasn't going to be pretty, but it was going to be thorough. On the drive home, I called the private investigator, a woman named Janet Torres. Harold Ashford referred me, I said when she answered. Cheating spouse? Among other things. My rate is $200 a day plus expenses. Minimum 3-day retainer, cash only. Done. When can we meet? Tomorrow, noon, at the Riverside Diner on Route 15. Order the meatloaf and sit in the back booth. I'll find you. The next morning, Vivian was waiting in the kitchen when I came down for coffee. She looked like she hadn't slept, which made two of us. We need to talk, she said. I thought we did that yesterday. Elliott, please. I know you're angry. I'm not angry, Viv. Angry is what I get when someone cuts me off in traffic. This is something else entirely. She was holding a piece of paper, and her hands were shaking slightly. I wrote you a letter, explaining everything, how it started, why it happened, how sorry I am. I looked at the letter but didn't take it. Did you mention Amanda Pierce in your explanation? The color drained from her face. What? Amanda Pierce, from the DA's office, Craig's other girlfriend. Vivian sat down hard in one of the kitchen chairs. That's not... He said he wasn't seeing anyone else. He lied to you, Viv, just like you lied to me. She stared at the letter in her hands like it had suddenly caught fire. You're lying. You're just trying to hurt me. I don't need to lie to hurt you. The truth is doing a fine job of that all by itself. I poured my coffee and headed for the door. I'll be home late tonight. Don't wait up. Elliott, where are you going? To work. Some of us still have jobs that don't involve sleeping with our bosses. The meeting with Janet Torres went exactly as I'd expected. She was a small, sharp-eyed woman in her 50s who asked direct questions and took detailed notes. By the time we finished, she had a complete timeline of Vivian's affair and a plan for documenting Craig's involvement with both women. This Dutton character sounds like a real winner, she said, closing her notebook. How long do you want me to follow him? Until we have everything we need. That could get expensive. I've been married for 20 years. I know what expensive looks like. That evening, I came home to find Vivian's car in the driveway and the lights on in the living room. She was sitting on the couch with her phone in her hands, and she'd been crying. You were right, she said without looking up. About Amanda. I usually am. It's an occupational hazard. I called Craig today, confronted him about her. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. He said I was being paranoid, said I was letting you poison my mind against him. And then? And then Amanda answered his phone when I called back an hour later. I sat down in the chair across from her, not because I wanted to comfort her, but because this conversation was important, and I wanted to see her face. What did Amanda say? She said Craig told her I was just a colleague who'd been bothering him, that I was married and unstable and trying to cause problems for him at work. The irony was almost perfect. Craig had thrown Vivian under the bus to protect his relationship with Amanda, just like Vivian had thrown our marriage under the bus to be with Craig. I'm sorry, I said, And I meant it. Not sorry that she'd been hurt, but sorry that she'd been stupid enough to think a man who would cheat with her wouldn't cheat on her. Elliott, I know I don't deserve it, but I need you to forgive me. I need us to try to work this out. Why? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Because we're married. Because we love each other. Because 20 years should count for something. 20 years does count for something, Viv. It counts as 20 years of trust that you threw away for 6 months of excitement. It wasn't about excitement. It was about feeling wanted, feeling special. You were special. You were my wife. Were? I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, our neighbor was walking his dog, probably heading home to a wife who hadn't spent their savings on hotel rooms with her boss. I've been thinking about this all day, I said. About what you said yesterday morning, about me being better in bed. You know what the interesting thing is about that comment? She didn't answer. It wasn't about me at all. It was about you trying to justify what you'd already done. You needed me to be the problem so you could be the victim. That's not... It is, though. Because if I was the problem, then Craig was the solution. If I was inadequate, then you were just meeting your needs. If I was a bad husband, then you were a good wife, making the best of a bad situation. I turned back to face her. But here's the thing, Viv. I wasn't a bad husband. I was a good husband married to a woman who wanted to be somewhere else. She was crying again, but these tears were different. These were the tears of someone who was finally understanding the magnitude of what they'd lost. I want to come home, she whispered. You are home. I want to come home to you. I looked at her sitting there in her work clothes, holding her phone like it might ring with good news from a man who'd already moved on to his next conquest. She looked small and lost and broken, and part of me wanted to fix her the way I fixed everything else. But I was an engineer, and I knew the difference between something that could be repaired and something that needed to be demolished and rebuilt from the foundation up. I don't think that's possible anymore, I said. Elliott, please. I'm going to bed. We can talk more tomorrow. In the guest room? In the guest room. As I headed upstairs, I heard her make a phone call. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was desperate. Probably calling Craig, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her affair. In the guest room, I checked my email and found a message from Janet Torres with the subject line, Day 1 Results. The attached photos showed Craig having lunch with Amanda Pierce at an upscale restaurant downtown. They were holding hands across the table and looking very much like a couple. The next photo showed Craig leaving Amanda's apartment building at 7:30 that morning. I forwarded the email to Harold with a note. Documentation, as requested. Then I opened my laptop and started working on the Morrison Bridge project. It was good to focus on something that made sense, something where the math worked out and the pieces fit together according to plan. Unlike my marriage, which had been built on a foundation I'd never realized was unstable. My phone buzzed with a text from Vivian. I'm going to fix this. I'm going to make this right. I didn't respond. Some things, once broken, couldn't be fixed. They could only be cleared away to make room for something new. The preparation phase was complete. Now came the hard part. The Riverside County Fair happened every October, transforming the empty lot behind the fire station into a small-town carnival, complete with cotton candy, ring toss games, and gossip that spread faster than wildfire. It was the kind of event where everyone showed up, whether they wanted to or not, because not showing up was its own kind of statement. I hadn't planned to go. The last thing I needed was to spend my Saturday afternoon making small talk with neighbors who probably knew more about my marriage than I'd realized. But Harold had called that morning with news. Janet got some interesting photos yesterday, he said. Craig and your wife meeting at the Starbucks on 5th Street. Very heated conversation. Lots of gesturing and tears on her part. When was this? Thursday afternoon. Same day you said she confronted him about Amanda Pierce. I processed this information while staring at my coffee. Vivian had told me she'd called Craig, not that she'd met with him in person. Another lie, or at least another omission. "There's more," Harold continued. "Craig's been telling people at his firm that he's concerned about Vivian's mental state. Says she's been calling him obsessively, showing up at his office uninvited. Is that true? Does it matter? He's building a narrative where he's the victim, and she's the unstable married woman who won't leave him alone. Smart. Very smart. Which is why you need to be smarter." Which was how I found myself walking through the county fair at 2 o'clock on a Saturday afternoon, looking for my wife and her former lover. I found Vivian first, standing in line at the kettle corn booth with her sister Linda and Linda's husband Mike. She was wearing jeans and a sweater that I'd bought her for Christmas 2 years ago, and she was laughing at something Linda had said. For a moment, she looked like the woman I'd married, before the lies and the hotel receipts and the cruel comments about my performance in bed. "Elliott!" Linda spotted me first and waved me over. "I didn't know you were coming." "Last-minute decision," I said, joining their group. "How's everyone doing?" "Good, good," Mike said, but his eyes were uncomfortable. Linda had clearly told him about the marriage troubles, and he was the kind of man who'd rather talk about sports than feelings. Vivian looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Hope, maybe, mixed with uncertainty. "I'm glad you came," she said quietly. "Wouldn't miss it. 20 years of county fairs, right? Why break tradition now?" Linda and Mike exchanged a look. They knew something was wrong, but small-town politeness demanded they pretend otherwise. "Well," Linda said brightly, "we should go find the kids. They're probably spending their allowance on those rigged carnival games." After they left, Vivian and I stood in awkward silence while the kettle corn machine popped and hissed behind us. "Elliott, about Thursday, you met with Craig." She looked startled. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter how I know. What matters is that you lied to me. Again." "I didn't lie. I just didn't mention—" "Vivian, we're in public. Let's not do this here." But as I said it, I realized that public was exactly where this needed to happen. Private conversations could be denied, minimized, rewritten in her memory to make herself the victim. Public conversations had witnesses. "Actually," I said, raising my voice just enough to be heard by the people around us, "let's talk about this right now." "Elliott, please, no, I think it's time for some honesty. You've been lying to me for 6 months about your affair with Craig Dutton. You've spent $8,000 of our money on hotel rooms and dinners with him. And when I found out, you blamed me for not being good enough in bed." The people in line around us had gone quiet. Vivian's face was turning red. "Stop it," she whispered. "Stop what? Telling the truth? I thought you wanted to work on our marriage. Doesn't that start with honesty?" "Not like this." "Then how? In private? Where you can lie some more? Where you can make me the villain in your story?" I looked around at the small crowd that had gathered. Some faces I recognized, some I didn't. But all of them were listening with the kind of fascination people have for car accidents. "My wife has been having an affair," I announced to no one in particular. 6 months with her boss, Craig Dutton. Spent our savings on hotel rooms, then told me it was my fault for not satisfying her. "Elliott, stop!" Vivian grabbed my arm, but I shook her off. "The funny thing is," I continued, "Craig's been telling people at work that she's unstable, that she won't leave him alone. Turns out he's got another girlfriend, and my wife was just the side piece to his side piece." Someone in the crowd made a sympathetic noise. Vivian looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. "So if anyone's wondering why the Mercers won't be at the Halloween party this year, or why we're selling the house, or why Vivian's moving out, now you know. She chose Craig Dutton over 20 years of marriage, and Craig Dutton chose someone else over her." I turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back at Vivian. "Oh, and if anyone sees Craig around town, you might want to ask him about Amanda Pierce. Apparently he's very good at juggling multiple relationships. Just not very good at being honest about it." I left Vivian standing in line for kettle corn, surrounded by neighbors who were suddenly very interested in their phones or the ground or anything other than looking directly at her. I made it about 50 yards before my phone started buzzing with text messages. Most were from Vivian, but there were others. Linda, asking what the hell I thought I was doing. Harold, saying he'd heard about my performance at the fair and wanted to talk. Janet Torres, saying she'd gotten some great photos of Craig's reaction when someone apparently told him about my little speech. I was reading Janet's message when I heard someone call my name. "Elliott Mercer, you son of a gun!" I turned to see Marty Banks, my project manager at Hartwell and Associates, walking toward me with a beer in one hand and a corn dog in the other. Marty was the kind of guy who found humor in everything, which made him either the best person or the worst person to run into right now. "Marty, didn't expect to see you here." "Are you kidding? This is the social event of the season. Plus, my kids love the pony rides." He took a bite of his corn dog and studied my face. "You look like a man who just burned down his own house." "Something like that." "I heard some interesting rumors on the way over here. Something about you making a public announcement regarding your wife's extracurricular activities." "News travels fast in small towns." "Faster than you think. Craig Dutton's here somewhere, and word is he's not happy about being the star of your little show." I felt a spike of adrenaline. "Craig's here?" "Saw him about 10 minutes ago, over by the beer tent. He was with some blonde who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else." Amanda Pierce, probably. This was getting interesting. "Marty, do me a favor. If you see Craig heading in my direction, text me." "Elliott, what are you planning?" "Nothing violent. I'm not stupid." "That's not what I asked." I looked at my friend and colleague, a man who'd worked with me for 8 years and knew me well enough to recognize when I was operating on a plan. "I'm planning to have a conversation with Craig about boundaries and consequences. Very civilized." "Uh-huh. And if this civilized conversation turns less civilized?" "Then you'll have a good story to tell at work on Monday." Marty grinned. In that case, he's heading toward the ring toss games. Blonde's still with him, and she looks seriously unhappy. I found Craig exactly where Marty said he'd be, standing next to Amanda Pierce, while she half-heartedly tossed rings at bottles. He was wearing khakis and a polo shirt that probably cost more than most people's car payments, and he had the kind of artificial tan that came from expensive salons rather than actual outdoor work. Amanda was pretty in a sharp, professional way, but her body language screamed discomfort. She kept looking around like she was expecting trouble, which suggested someone had already told her about my announcement at the kettle corn booth. I walked up to them with my hands in my pockets and a smile on my face. "Craig Dutton, right? I'm Elliott Mercer. I believe you know my wife." Craig's face went through several interesting expressions before settling on forced politeness. "Elliott. Yes, Vivian's mentioned you." "I'll bet she has, and you must be Amanda Pierce. I've heard a lot about you, too." Amanda looked confused. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" "Not directly, but we have a mutual friend. Craig here has been very busy lately." Craig stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne. Expensive, like everything else about him. "Elliott, I think there might be some misunderstanding." "No misunderstanding at all. You've been sleeping with my wife for 6 months. She's been spending our money on hotel rooms for your little dates, and you've been lying to both her and Amanda about your other relationships." Amanda's face went pale. "What is he talking about, Craig?" "He's talking nonsense. This man is obviously having some kind of breakdown." "Actually," I interrupted, "I'm having the opposite of a breakdown. I'm having what you might call a breakthrough. See, for months I've been wondering what was wrong with my marriage. Turns out the problem wasn't my marriage. The problem was that my wife was sharing it with a man who can't keep his promises to anyone." "You need to walk away," Craig said, his voice getting harder. "Right now." "Or what? You'll call security, file a complaint, sue me for harassment?" I laughed. "Craig, I'm a structural engineer. I understand how things break down under pressure. Right now, you're under a lot of pressure." Is it true? Amanda asked, looking at Craig with an expression that could have frozen water. About you and this married woman? Amanda, let me explain. It's true, I said. Janet Torres has some lovely photographs of you and Vivian at the Starbucks on 5th Street. Very intimate conversation, lots of hand-holding and tears. Craig's face was turning red. You had us followed? I had my wife followed. You just happened to be there. Amanda threw her rings on the ground and started walking away. Craig called after her, but she didn't stop. Look what you've done, Craig snarled, turning back to me. What I've done? Craig, I didn't make you cheat with my wife. I didn't make you lie to Amanda. I didn't make you spend months sneaking around and breaking promises to everyone in your life. I just made it public. You're going to regret this. Maybe. But not as much as you're going to regret thinking you could play with other people's lives without consequences. I started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Craig? Next time you want to tell people that my wife is unstable and won't leave you alone, you might want to make sure those people don't know that you're the one who pursued her in the first place. Small towns, you know. People talk. I left him standing there next to the ring toss game, looking like a man who'd just realized his carefully constructed life was falling apart. My phone was buzzing constantly now with calls and texts, but I ignored them all. I had one more stop to make before I went home. I found Vivian in the parking lot, sitting in her car with the engine running. She was crying, but they weren't the gentle tears of someone who felt sorry for what they'd done. These were the angry tears of someone who felt sorry for themselves. I tapped on her window. She rolled it down, but didn't look at me. That was cruel, she said. Yes, it was. Everyone's going to know. Everyone's going to talk. Yes, they are. My reputation is ruined. Your reputation was ruined the day you decided to sleep with your boss. I just made it official. She finally looked at me, and her eyes were full of rage. I hate you for this. Good. That makes what comes next a lot easier. What comes next? I pulled a manila envelope from my jacket and handed it to her through the window. Divorce papers. You're being served. Her hands shook as she took the envelope. Elliott, please. We can still fix this. No, Vivian. We can't. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be replaced. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer. You'll lose. The adultery is documented. The financial waste is documented. Your lies are documented. You can fight it if you want, but all you'll do is make it more expensive and more public. I started to walk away, then stopped one more time. By the way, you might want to call Craig. Amanda just left him standing by the ring toss games, and he looked like he could use some comfort. Oh, wait, that's right. He told everyone you won't leave him alone. Probably best to keep your distance. I left her sitting in her car in the parking lot of the county fair, holding divorce papers and the ruins of her carefully planned affair. The first strike was complete. The foundation was cracked. Now came the demolition. The call came at 6:30 Monday morning while I was making coffee and trying to pretend my life hadn't exploded over the weekend. Elliott, it's Harold. We need to talk. Now. Good morning to you, too. Craig Dutton filed a restraining order against you, claims you threatened him at the county fair and have been harassing him. I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly wide awake. That's interesting, considering I spoke to him for maybe 5 minutes and never threatened anything except his reputation. Do you have witnesses? About 50 people saw the whole conversation. Marty Banks was nearby and Janet Torres was taking pictures from across the midway. Good, because we have a hearing this afternoon, and if Craig gets this restraining order, it's going to complicate everything. What time? 2 o'clock. Courthouse, room 3B. Wear a suit and try to look like a respectable member of society instead of a man plotting revenge. I am a respectable member of society. Elliott, you publicly humiliated your wife and her lover at a county fair. I'm not judging. I probably would have done the same thing. But let's not pretend you're taking the high road here. After Harold hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to figure out Craig's angle. The restraining order was smart, actually. It painted me as the aggressor and him as the victim, which would play well if this ended up in divorce court. It also meant I couldn't go near him, which limited my options for further conversation. But it also meant Craig was scared. Men who felt secure in their position didn't run to judges for protection after a single public confrontation. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Torres. "Interesting developments? Can we meet?" I called her back. "What kind of developments?" "The kind that might explain why Craig's suddenly feeling nervous. Can you meet me at the diner in an hour?" Janet was waiting in our usual back booth with a coffee and a manila folder that looked suspiciously thick. "Craig Dutton's been busy since Saturday," she said without preamble. "Very busy." She opened the folder and spread out a series of photographs. Craig leaving his office building. Craig at an ATM. Craig meeting with a man I didn't recognize in the parking lot of a strip mall. "Who's the other guy?" "Marcus Webb, private investigator. Not a very good one, but cheap. Craig hired him yesterday to dig up dirt on you." "What kind of dirt?" "The kind that doesn't exist. I know Marcus, and he's the type who'll manufacture evidence if he can't find any. He's been asking questions about your finances, your work history, whether you've ever been arrested." I studied the photos. Craig looked nervous in all of them, checking over his shoulder, talking with his hands. "There's more," Janet continued. "After you left the fair on Saturday, Craig and Vivian had another meeting, very heated. She was crying, he was angry. Looked like she was begging him for something. Any idea what? Based on the lip reading and body language, my guess is she wanted him to back up her story about your marriage being abusive or unstable. He refused. That was interesting. Craig was cutting Vivian loose completely, leaving her to face the divorce alone while he protected his own reputation. How do you know he refused?" Janet smiled. "Because 20 minutes later, Vivian showed up at Amanda Pierce's apartment building, stayed for about an hour. When she left, Amanda was standing in the window watching her go, and she looked pretty upset. Vivian went to see Amanda. Apparently, your wife decided that if Craig wouldn't help her, maybe his other girlfriend would be interested in comparing notes. I had to admire the strategy, even if it was born of desperation. Vivian was trying to turn Craig's women against each other, hoping that the chaos would somehow work in her favor. Did it work? Judge for yourself." Janet slid another photo across the table. This one showed Amanda Pierce leaving her apartment building with 2 suitcases and a grim expression. Where was she going? Her sister's place in Richmond, at least temporarily. Looks like Craig's romantic triangle just became a romantic single point. I leaned back in the booth and tried to process this information. In the span of 3 days, Craig had lost both his girlfriend and his married lover, been publicly exposed as a cheater, and was now so worried about my reaction that he'd hired a private investigator and filed for a restraining order. "Janet, I need you to do something for me." "What kind of something?" "The legal kind. I want to know everything about Craig's business dealings, his client relationships, his financial situation, everything. That's going to be expensive. I don't care about expensive, I care about thorough. Any particular reason?" I looked at the photos spread across the table, evidence of a man whose life was unraveling faster than he could control it. Because scared people make mistakes, and when Craig makes his mistake, I want to be ready for it. The restraining order hearing went exactly as Harold had predicted. Craig showed up in an expensive suit with an expensive lawyer, looking like a man who'd been victimized by an unstable husband. I showed up in my best suit with Harold, looking like a respectable engineer who'd been pushed too far. The judge, a tired-looking woman in her 60s, listened to both sides with the expression of someone who'd seen this exact scenario 100 times before. Craig's lawyer painted me as a dangerous man who'd made threats and engaged in harassment. Harold countered with witness statements from the county fair, emphasizing that I'd never threatened violence, and had only spoken the truth about Craig's affair with my wife. "Mr. Mercer," the judge said finally, "did you threaten Mr. Dutton in any way?" "No, Your Honor. I informed him that his actions would have consequences, but I never threatened him with physical harm." "And these consequences you mentioned?" "Social and professional consequences, Your Honor, the natural result of his choices becoming public knowledge." The judge looked at Craig. "Mr. Dutton, do you have any evidence that Mr. Mercer threatened you with physical violence?" Craig's lawyer whispered something in his ear. "No, Your Honor, but his behavior was intimidating and—" "Mr. Dutton, you're a managing partner at a law firm. You understand the difference between intimidating behavior and actual threats, correct?" "Yes, Your Honor, but—" "Then you understand that being confronted about your affair with a married woman, while embarrassing, doesn't constitute grounds for a restraining order unless actual threats were made." The judge denied the restraining order, but she also issued a warning to both of us about keeping our distance from each other. As we left the courthouse, Harold was grinning. "That went better than expected," he said. Craig looked surprised. Craig looked like a man who's used to getting his way and just discovered that judges don't care how expensive his lawyer is. We were walking to our cars when my phone rang. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. "Elliott, I need to see you. Tonight. It's important." "I'm not sure that's a good idea." "Please. There are things you don't know. Things about Craig that you need to understand." I looked at Harold, who was listening to my side of the conversation with interest. "What kind of things?" "Not over the phone. Can you meet me at the house at 8? After I hung up, Harold raised an eyebrow. That sounded ominous. Everything about this situation is ominous. "Elliott, be careful. Vivian's desperate and desperate people do unpredictable things." "What kind of unpredictable things?" "The kind that involve false accusations, manufactured evidence, and claims of domestic violence." I thought about that as I drove home. Vivian had already lied to me for 6 months. She'd spent our money on her affair. She'd blamed me for her infidelity. What was to stop her from taking the next step and claiming I'd been abusive or threatening? But I also knew Vivian, or thought I did. She was manipulative and selfish, but she wasn't vindictive. At least, she never had been before. Of course, I'd never divorced her before either. At 8 o'clock sharp, Vivian knocked on the front door of what used to be our house. She looked terrible, pale, thin, with dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't been sleeping. "Thank you for seeing me," she said as I let her in. "What's so important that it couldn't wait?" She sat down on the couch, the same couch where she'd tried to explain her affair a week earlier. It felt like a lifetime ago. "Craig's been lying to both of us," she said, "about everything." "That's not exactly news, Viv." "No, I mean everything. The affair, his feelings for me, his situation at work. All of it." I sat down across from her, maintaining distance. "Explain." "He never intended to leave his girlfriend for me. He told me Amanda was just a colleague, someone he had to spend time with for work. But when I went to see her yesterday, she said he'd told her the same thing about me." "You went to see Amanda?" "I had to know the truth. She's been with Craig for 4 months, Elliott. 4 months. Which means he was seeing both of us at the same time from the very beginning. I processed this information. Craig hadn't just cheated on Amanda with Vivian, or cheated on his marriage with both of them. He'd been running a deliberate, calculated deception from day one. "There's more," Vivian continued. "Amanda told me things about Craig's business, about problems at his firm." "What kind of problems?" "Money problems, client complaints, partners who want him out." "How would Amanda know about that?" "Because she works for the DA's office, and they've been getting complaints about Craig's firm. Ethics violations, misuse of client funds, that kind of thing." I leaned forward. This was getting interesting. "Vivian, why are you telling me this?" She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. Because I think Craig's going to try to blame everything on me. The affair, the problems at work, all of it. And I think he's going to use our divorce to make himself look like the victim. How? By claiming that I seduced him, that I was unstable, that I threatened to ruin his career if he didn't leave Amanda for me. Did you threaten that? No, but I did tell him I loved him, and I did ask him to choose between us. He could twist that into something it wasn't. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the street was quiet, normal, the kind of suburban evening where the biggest drama was usually someone's garbage can blowing over. Vivian, what do you want from me? I want us to work together, to protect ourselves from Craig. Work together how? Pool our information, share what we know about his lies, his business problems, his pattern of manipulation. I turned back to face her. And in exchange? In exchange, I'll cooperate with the divorce. No fighting over assets, no claims of abuse, no attempts to drag this out. It was a tempting offer, but I'd learned not to trust anything Vivian said without verification. I need to think about it. Elliott, there's something else. Something Amanda told me that you need to know. What? Craig's been asking questions about you, about your work, your finances, your background. He hired someone to investigate you. I know about Marcus Webb. She looked surprised. How do you… Never mind. The point is, Craig's planning something. Something bigger than just the restraining order. Like what? I don't know, but Amanda said he's been talking to someone at your company, asking about your projects, your reputation. That got my attention. Someone at Hartwell and Associates? She didn't know who. But Elliott, what if he's trying to sabotage your career? What if he's planning to claim that you've been unstable at work, or that you've made threats against him there? I sat back down, my mind racing. Craig was a lawyer. He understood how to build a case, how to create a narrative that would stand up in court. If he could establish a pattern of instability or threatening behavior, it would strengthen his position and weaken mine. Vivian, I want you to write down everything Amanda told you. Every detail, every conversation, everything you can remember. Does that mean you'll work with me? I looked at my wife, my soon-to-be ex-wife, sitting on our couch in our living room asking me to trust her one more time after 6 months of lies. It means I'll consider it. But Vivian, if you lie to me again, if you hold back information or try to manipulate this situation to your advantage, our deal is off and you can face Craig's revenge on your own. I understand. I hope you do. Because this isn't about saving our marriage anymore. This is about survival. After Vivian left, I called Harold and filled him in on the conversation. She could be lying, he said. This could be her way of getting back into your good graces. Maybe. But if she's telling the truth about Craig investigating me, we need to know about it. I'll make some calls, see if anyone at your company has been contacted. And Harold? Speed this up. Whatever Craig's planning, I don't think we have much time. Elliott, what are you thinking? I looked out the window at the quiet street, thinking about structural engineering and load-bearing capacity and what happens when someone tries to bring down a building that's stronger than they realized. I'm thinking Craig Dutton is about to learn the difference between intimidation and actual consequences. The escalation was accelerating. The chase was about to begin. The call from Marty came at 7 a.m, just as I was getting ready for work. Elliott, we have a problem, a big one. What kind of problem? The kind where someone called the state licensing board yesterday and filed a complaint against you. Professional misconduct, they're claiming, something about threatening a client and misrepresenting structural calculations. I sat down hard in my kitchen chair. What client? That's the interesting part. The complaint doesn't name a specific client, just says there have been multiple incidents of unprofessional behavior. Marty, I've never threatened a client in my life. I know that, you know that, but the licensing board has to investigate anyway, and until they do, you're suspended from signing off on any structural plans. I closed my eyes and tried to think. Without my ability to approve structural plans, I was essentially useless to Hartwell and Associates. And if the investigation dragged on, I could lose my license permanently. Who filed the complaint? Anonymous, but Elliott, this has Craig Dutton written all over it. After Marty hung up, I called Harold. We need to meet, I said. Now. What happened? Craig just tried to destroy my career. Harold's office felt smaller than usual, cramped with the weight of what we were discussing. I'd filled him in on the licensing board complaint, and his expression had grown grimmer with each detail. This is escalation, he said. Craig's not just defending himself anymore, he's going on the offensive. Can he do this? File anonymous complaints? Anyone can file a complaint with the licensing board. They're required to investigate, even if the complaint turns out to be baseless. How long does an investigation take? Months, maybe longer if they find anything that requires follow-up. I stood up and paced to the window. Outside, people were going about their normal lives, heading to jobs that weren't in jeopardy, dealing with problems that didn't involve vindictive lawyers trying to destroy their livelihoods. Harold, I need you to do something for me. What? I need you to set up a meeting with Craig. Tonight. Harold stared at me. Elliott, that's probably the worst idea you've had since you decided to confront him at the county fair. Maybe, but this has gone beyond divorce proceedings and hurt feelings. He's trying to destroy my ability to make a living. So we fight the complaint through proper channels. We document his harassment, his pattern of retaliation, which takes months, maybe years. Meanwhile, my reputation is ruined and my career is over. Harold leaned back in his chair. What are you planning? A conversation. One professional to another. Elliott. Harold. I'm not going to threaten him. I'm not going to touch him. But I am going to make it very clear that attacking my livelihood was a mistake. And if he refuses to meet? Then we'll know he's planning something even worse. Harold made the call while I sat in his office and tried to control my anger. Craig's secretary put him through after a brief hold. Craig, it's Harold Ashford. I represent Elliott Mercer. Yes, I'm aware of the restraining order hearing. No, this isn't about harassment. This is about the complaint filed with the state licensing board. I thought you might know something about that. Harold listened for a moment, then covered the phone and looked at me. He's claiming he doesn't know anything about any complaint. Tell him I want to meet tonight to discuss it anyway. Harold relayed the message, listened to Craig's response, then hung up. He'll meet you at 8 o'clock, neutral location, the conference room at his office building. He's bringing his lawyer. Good. That means he's taking this seriously. Elliott, what aren't you telling me? I looked at my friend and attorney, a man who'd known me for 25 years and could read my expressions better than most people. I'm telling you that Craig Dutton made a mistake when he decided to attack my career, and I'm going to make sure he understands exactly what kind of mistake it was. The Kellerman, Dutton and Associates building was a modern glass structure downtown, the kind of place that was designed to intimidate clients with its expensive marble lobby and original artwork. I arrived at 8 o'clock sharp, wearing my best suit and carrying a leather briefcase that contained everything Janet Torres had gathered on Craig over the past 2 weeks. Craig was waiting in the conference room with his lawyer, a thin man named Peterson, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Craig had changed out of his usual expensive casual wear into a dark suit that was probably meant to make him look more serious and professional. Instead, it made him look like he was attending a funeral. Elliott, Craig said as I entered the room. I have to say I'm surprised you wanted this meeting. Are you? I would have thought you'd be expecting it. I sat down across from them and opened my briefcase. Peterson leaned forward slightly, probably expecting legal documents or evidence related to the divorce. Instead, I pulled out a manila folder and placed it on the table. Craig, we need to talk about your problem. My problem? Your financial problem, your client problem, your partnership problem. Craig's face went very still. I don't know what you're talking about. I opened the folder and spread out the first set of documents: bank statements, credit reports, business filings, all public records, all perfectly legal to obtain. Your firm is in trouble, Craig. Has been for about 8 months now. 3 major clients have filed complaints with the State Bar Association. 2 others have threatened lawsuits over mishandled cases. Your partners are considering pushing you out. Peterson was reading over the documents with growing alarm. Craig was trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the tension in his jaw. Where did you get these? Public records, mostly. Amazing what you can find when you know where to look. I pulled out another set of papers. This is interesting, though. Loan applications where you inflated your income. Credit card applications where you misrepresented your assets. Those are private financial documents. Those are documents you submitted to public institutions, which makes them discoverable in civil proceedings. I smiled. I'm an engineer, Craig. I understand how to research structural integrity. Turns out your financial structure is about as stable as a house of cards. Peterson whispered something to Craig, who shook his head angrily. What do you want? Craig asked. I want you to withdraw the complaint you filed with the licensing board. I told Harold I don't know anything about... I pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. It showed Craig meeting with Marcus Webb in the parking lot of a strip mall. Marcus Webb, private investigator. Not a very good one, but he has contacts at the licensing board. Contacts who can file anonymous complaints for the right price. Craig stared at the photograph. This proves nothing. Maybe not by itself. But combined with the timeline, your financial desperation, and your pattern of retaliation against me, it paints a pretty clear picture. I leaned forward. Craig, you made a mistake when you decided to attack my career. See, when you went after my marriage, that was personal. When you went after my livelihood, that became business. Is that a threat? It's a statement of fact. You're a lawyer, so you understand how civil litigation works. I can tie you up in court for years, Craig. Depositions, document discovery, expert witnesses. Even if you eventually win, the legal fees will bankrupt you. Peterson was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Mr. Mercer, if you're threatening my client... I'm not threatening anyone. I'm explaining consequences. I pulled out the final set of documents. These are complaints I've prepared for filing with the State Bar Association. Ethics violations, client fund misappropriation, fraudulent loan applications, all based on public records and documented behavior. Craig's face had gone pale. You can't prove any of that. I don't have to prove it, Craig. I just have to file it. The investigation will take months, maybe years. During that time, your clients will lose confidence, your partners will distance themselves, and your reputation will be destroyed. I stood up and closed my briefcase. Or you can withdraw the licensing board complaint against me, and these documents stay in my filing cabinet. This is blackmail, Peterson said. No, this is negotiation. Blackmail would be if I threatened to release information about Craig's affairs to his remaining clients, or if I suggested that his pattern of lying to women might extend to lying to judges and juries. I walked to the door, then turned back. Craig, you have 24 hours to withdraw the complaint. After that, I file everything, and we let the various licensing boards sort out who's telling the truth. Elliott, Craig said, his voice strained. You're making a mistake. I have resources, connections. You had resources. You had connections. What you have now is a choice. I opened the door. Choose wisely. I left them sitting in the conference room with the documents spread across the table like evidence at a crime scene. In the elevator down to the lobby, I allowed myself a small smile. Craig had wanted to play hardball. He was about to learn that engineers understood structural failure better than most people. My phone rang as I reached my car. Vivian's name appeared on the screen. Elliott, something's happened. Craig called me an hour ago. screaming about you and threatening to... Slow down. What did he say? He said you'd tried to blackmail him, that you had private information about his business, that he was going to destroy both of us. Where are you now? At my sister's house. Elliott, I'm scared. Craig sounded unhinged. I thought about the man I'd just left in the conference room, backed into a corner with his career and reputation on the line. Desperate people did desperate things. Vivian, stay at Linda's tonight. Don't go home, don't go to work alone, and don't meet with Craig under any circumstances. What did you do? I gave him a choice. Apparently, he's not happy with his options. Elliott. Vivian, I have to go. I'll call you tomorrow. I hung up and sat in my car for a moment, thinking about next moves and contingency plans. Craig was cornered, which made him dangerous, but he was also exposed, which made him vulnerable. The final trap was set. Now we'd see if Craig was smart enough to walk away or desperate enough to spring it. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. I deleted the message and drove home. Some games, once started, had to be played to the end. The end game was about to begin. The call came at 5:30 in the morning. Harold's voice was tight with concern. Elliott, Craig Dutton was arrested last night. I sat up in bed, instantly awake. Arrested for what? Breaking and entering. Apparently he was caught trying to get into your office building at Hartwell and Associates around midnight. Security cameras got everything. I processed this information while staring at my bedroom ceiling. Craig had gone from filing anonymous complaints to attempted breaking and entering in less than 24 hours. Desperation had made him reckless. Was he looking for something specific? Hard to say. Security caught him before he got past the lobby. But Elliott, this changes everything. The restraining order, the licensing complaint, now this. It establishes a clear pattern of harassment. What happens now? He'll be arraigned this morning, probably released on bail, but his lawyer's going to have a hard time explaining why a managing partner at a law firm was breaking into buildings in the middle of the night. After Harold hung up, I made coffee and tried to think through the implications. Craig's arrest would be public record, which meant it would be in the local newspaper by evening. His law firm would have to decide whether to stand by a partner who'd been caught committing crimes or cut him loose to protect their reputation. My phone rang again. This time it was Marty. Elliott, you need to see the newspaper. Front page. What newspaper? All of them. Craig Dutton's arrest made the morning edition, but that's not the interesting part. The interesting part is what else they found when they searched his office. I drove to the nearest convenience store and bought copies of 3 different newspapers. The headlines varied, but the story was the same. Local attorney arrested for breaking and entering. What made it front-page news wasn't the crime itself, but what the police had discovered during their investigation. Craig's office had contained files on me, Vivian, Amanda Pierce, and several other people. Detailed files with personal information, financial records, photographs, and what the newspaper described as evidence of systematic harassment and stalking behavior. The article quoted an unnamed source at the police department, saying that Craig had been conducting unauthorized investigations into private citizens for several months, and that additional charges were being considered. I was reading the article for the 3rd time when my phone rang. Janet Torres. Have you seen the news? She asked. Just finished reading it. How much of this did you know about? More than I told you. I've been tracking Craig's activities for 2 weeks, and he's been busy. The files they found in his office. That's just the tip of the iceberg. What do you mean? I mean, Craig Dutton has been running a one-man revenge operation against everyone he thinks has wronged him. You, Vivian, Amanda, 3 former clients who filed complaints against him, 2 ex-wives, and his former business partner. How do you know all this? Because I've been working with the police since last week. They contacted me after someone reported suspicious activity around Amanda Pierce's apartment building. I sat in my car outside the convenience store, trying to process what Janet was telling me. You've been working with the police? Elliott, Craig hired Marcus Webb to investigate you, but he also hired 2 other private investigators to dig up dirt on everyone else. When one of them got caught photographing Amanda's apartment, she called the police. They started investigating, and Craig's whole operation unraveled. Why didn't you tell me? Because I needed you to act naturally. If you'd known the police were building a case against Craig, you might have done something differently. Your meeting with him last night was perfect. It showed him making threats and escalating his behavior right before he got arrested. My phone buzzed with another call. Vivian. Elliott, have you seen the news? About Craig? I've seen it. What does this mean for us? For the divorce? It means your ex-lover is going to be too busy with criminal charges to interfere with our proceedings. Elliott, there's something else. Something I didn't tell you before. I closed my eyes and prepared for another revelation. What? Craig asked me to help him get into your office building. He said he needed to find evidence that you'd been falsifying structural reports, that you were unstable and dangerous. When was this? 3 days ago. He said if I helped him, he'd testify that our marriage had problems before the affair started, that you'd been emotionally abusive. And what did you tell him? I told him no. Elliott, whatever else I've done, I would never help someone sabotage your career. I believed her, mainly because Craig's arrest proved he'd attempted the break-in alone. Vivian, where are you now? Still at Linda's. But Elliott, I want to come home. I want to try to work things out. No. What? I said no. Craig's arrest doesn't change what you did. It doesn't erase 6 months of lies and betrayal. It just means you picked a man who turned out to be even worse than I thought. She was quiet for a long moment. So the divorce is still happening? The divorce is still happening. But it's going to be a lot simpler now. Craig can't interfere, you don't have any leverage, and I have documentation of everything. Elliott, I know I hurt you. I know I made terrible choices. But we had 20 good years before this happened. We had 20 years where I thought we were happy. Turns out I was wrong about that too. I hung up and sat in the parking lot, watching normal people go about their normal lives. In the space of 2 weeks, I'd discovered my wife's affair, filed for divorce, been investigated by private detectives, had my career attacked, and watched my wife's lover get arrested for trying to break into my office. It felt like the climax of a movie, except movies usually ended with some kind of resolution or redemption. Real life was messier. My phone rang again. Harold. Elliott, we need to talk. The prosecutor wants to meet with you about Craig's case. What kind of meeting? The kind where they ask if you want to press additional charges for harassment and stalking. Do I? That depends on how much revenge you're looking for. I thought about that question as I drove to Harold's office. How much revenge was enough? Craig's career was probably over. His reputation was destroyed. He was facing criminal charges that could result in jail time and the loss of his law license. Vivian had lost her job. The law firm had quietly let her go after the affair became public knowledge. She'd lost most of her friends, her social standing, and her marriage. She was living with her sister and looking at starting over at 38 with nothing but her car and her clothes. The revenge was complete. The question was whether it was satisfying. The meeting with the prosecutor lasted 2 hours. They laid out a case against Craig that included stalking, harassment, attempted breaking and entering, and what they called criminal conspiracy to damage reputation and livelihood. Mr. Mercer, the prosecutor said, we can proceed with or without your cooperation, but your testimony would strengthen the case considerably. What kind of sentence are we talking about? With his record and the severity of the charges, probably 2 to 5 years. Plus disbarment, of course. I looked at Harold, who nodded slightly. Craig had brought this on himself through his own choices and escalating behavior. I'll testify, I said. 3 months later, Craig Dutton was sentenced to 3 years in prison and permanent disbarment from the practice of law. The judge called his behavior a systematic campaign of harassment that showed complete disregard for the law he was sworn to uphold. Vivian and I were divorced 2 weeks after Craig's sentencing. She didn't contest anything, and the proceedings took less than an hour. She kept her car and her personal belongings. I kept everything else. As we left the courthouse, she stopped me on the steps. "Elliott, I know this doesn't change anything, but I want you to know that I'm sorry, not just for getting caught, but for all of it. I know you are. Do you think we could ever be friends? Someday?" I looked at the woman I'd been married to for 20 years, who'd shared my bed and my dreams and my bank account, who'd thrown it all away for 6 months with a man who turned out to be a criminal. "I don't know, Viv. I honestly don't know." She nodded and walked away, and I never saw her again. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I got a promotion at work. The licensing board complaint had been withdrawn and dismissed, and my reputation had actually been enhanced by the revelation that Craig had targeted me for harassment. I bought a smaller house closer to work, started dating a woman named Sarah who worked at the library, and began what people like to call moving on with my life. But sometimes late at night when I couldn't sleep, I thought about that Tuesday morning when Vivian had said, "If you were better in bed, I wouldn't need him." I thought about how one moment of cruel honesty had unraveled 20 years of marriage and led to the complete destruction of 3 people's lives. I thought about revenge and justice and the difference between consequences and punishment. And I thought about how sometimes, when people push you far enough, the only choice left is to push back harder than they ever imagined possible. The divorce was finalized before she could apologize. But in the end, the apology wouldn't have mattered anyway. Some things, once broken, can't be repaired. They can only be cleared away to make room for something new, something better, something honest. The fracture had become complete demolition. The old structure was gone, and I was finally free to build something that would last.